she was transitioning. And the first time she wore a skirt happened to be the night that they murdered her.
17-year-old Eddie Araujo lived his life as a young woman. Now police think he was murdered because of it.
Certainly the issue of gender came up, and our juvenile was killed.
Who tied the rope around their neck? Was it you?
Two of the defendants had sexual encounters with Araujo.
There was a heat of passion provoked by the sexual deception.
Gwen didn't owe anyone any explanations of who she was.
The case of Gwen Araujo was a moment of change. It was a time when the public learned about trans lives and a trans death.
I love this picture so much. So young, so innocent, so pure. Just a great loss. A great loss of a smart kid and beautiful soul that we only got to know for 17 years. She pretty much looked like this when they killed her. My name is Sylvia Guerrero, and I'm the mother to Gwen Araujo. I had a 2-in-1 child. I had Eddie from newborn to the age of 14, and then at 14, Eddie transitioned into Gwen until her death, which is only 3 years later. Baby Eddie was real sensitive, soft-spoken, just did a lot of little girly things more than a little boy would do.
When we would play, we would always play fight. And Baby Eddie would say, come on, like, I'll be She-Ra and you could be He-Man. Baby Eddie always wanted to be the girl characters.
Family and friends would always comment, you need to take him to a doctor because something's wrong with him. Obviously, there's nothing wrong health-wise with Eddie, other than Eddie was born in the wrong body. At 14, we did have a conversation. I'm gonna say Eddie because it was still Eddie at the time. Eddie came in and we were talking, we were having a heart-to-heart, and it just came out. Hey, Mom, I don't feel like a boy, I feel like a freak, and everybody calls me a freak at school, and we kind of cried about it, and I said, it's gonna be okay, you know, we're gonna get through this together. I love you, and this is how you were born, and we're gonna deal with it. And it took time. It took time for us to adjust to her transitioning.
His hair started growing out, and then he started dressing a little different, but he never dressed like a girl. Like, he didn't wear like skirts or anything like that. He wore hoodies and, you know, jeans.
But when she did transition into Gwen, she was finally happy. She was looking more and more and more like Gwen and less and less like Eddie.
I met Gwen. I worked at the Target electronic department, and this group of 3 approached me, and Gwen, just very confident, walks up to the counter and says, hey, I think you're really cute. Can I have your number? And it caught me off guard because nobody's ever done that. So I said yes, and exchanged numbers. And Gwen, I remember, had this cute oversized sweater. Her voice, very raspy, very cute. She was gorgeous. Gwen was beautiful. It was hard not to like her, love her, And we dated for a little while. To me, Gwen came off as just a high school girl. The gender thing never came up. I didn't care. It didn't really matter. I don't know why it matters. I don't understand it, but to some it does.
20 years ago, I really didn't see very many LGBTQ kids in our community. So she didn't go to the regular high school. She ended up going to a continuation high school. She wasn't really allowed to use the girls' restroom, and she was being threatened and teased there. And for her own safety, I pulled her out.
How do you want to walk into a school where you feel like you don't belong? How do you want to walk into a school where you feel like people are just going to be cruel? I think she definitely was struggling a lot. I remember one time, she had a razor to her wrist, and I think it was a lot of not understanding who she was or where she belonged in life or why she was like that.
There was nothing wrong with her. She was a kid. She was a typical 17-year-old teenager. She never flip-flopped. Once she started her transition, she was transitioning. And the first time she wore a skirt happened to be the night that they murdered her.
Prosecutors described the house where Gwen was killed as a party house.
It was in Newark, which is between San Francisco and San Jose. 3 brothers lived in the Newark home, the Merrill brothers, and it was also a frequent hangout for a number of their friends. One of them was 19-year-old Gwen Neighbors.
I know these guys, and usually when chicks come over and hang out, they bring them over so that they can get laid.
Prosecutors believe Gwen met Michael Magidson weeks before she was killed, and that he was the first one to invite her to the house. The group knew her by the name Lita.
The first night she came over, she was very flirty, and we were all very flirty back. I mean, we had a girl come over, and then we're sitting there, and then you see how she looked, and then she's all over everyone, but then nothing happened.
Eventually, though, there were intimate encounters. Over the next few weeks, at least 2 of the men had sexual relations with Gwen, Michael Magidson and Jose Merrill, the middle of the Merrill brothers. And while sexual, the encounters didn't reveal Gwen's biological gender, and there were questions, even speculation.
All night this girl's flirty, and then no one gets laid. Okay. That's kind of fishy.
Leading up to that night and what happened, discussions about, I think Gwen's a male.
And it was that suspicion that turned deadly the night of October 3rd.
So October 3rd, there was a lot of stuff going on that week at home, and so I said to her, it's Thursday, and now you're going to a party, and she's like, but I'll be back, I'll be back, Mom, I promise.
Eventually Gwen showed up that night because it was the party house. The others in the house that night decided that they were going to find out what the truth was that night.
Jose Merrill was there that night with his friends, Michael Magidson and Jason Casares. All 3 were 22 years old. 19-year-old Gwen Neighbors was also there. In addition, there was Paul Merrill with his girlfriend, Nicole Brown, and Manny, the youngest of the Merrill brothers. Gwen says the group was gathered around the kitchen table playing dominoes when they confronted Gwen.
When we started playing dominoes, that's when the conversation got going about, are you a man? Calling her out. Literally calling her out.
The conversation got intense, and the men demanded Gwen remove her underwear. Nicole says Michael volunteered to go to the bathroom with Gwen to check in private.
I had her in the bathroom for at least 30 to 45 minutes. During that time, I'm sitting out there with them, and that's when they were all coming to me. What do you think? Do you think this is a man? And I said, okay, well, you guys tell me why you think this is a man. And they started going, we have many reasons. First reason, I had sex with her in the butt, and she wouldn't let me touch her. I haven't touched her boobies, nothing. Second of all, someone said, I kissed her. If this is a man, I'm going to be grossed out. That's about, no talking about death or nothing. I'm just going to be grossed out. And I said, yeah, I'm going to be in shock myself, because I really think this is a woman. They kept saying, you're a female, you should go check. So finally, I just got fed up, and I said, fine, I'll go do it. I knock on the door. I go, can I come in? So they let me in. And I look her in her eye. I said, are you a man? She just looks down. And I said, I got it. No. And I took my hands and I spread her legs as hard as I could. And I went like this and I grabbed the package.
And Nicole came out of the bathroom first,
Screaming, and then goes into Paul's room.
In covering the trial, it struck me how many different points in time prosecutors say Gwen was attacked. The first time was when she emerged from the bathroom, and witnesses say Michael punched her, actually knocking her to the ground.
At first, they didn't even do anything. She was just sitting in the bathroom the whole time. They were all in shock. When she came from the bathroom, that's when Mike attacked her, and they tussled her down the ground and lifted her legs up and pulled the underwear over, and that's when we knew for sure.
After that, it appears that he, Jaron, and Jason went outside. Nicole and Jose stayed in the house with Gwen.
Jose was just in there tripping out, so I stopped him in the hallway. I put my arms on his shoulder. I said, Jose, it's gonna be okay. You did not know this was a man.
Jose became an emotional wreck, yelling, screaming about, does this mean I'm gay? Because Jose had had some sexual relations with Gwen. I always believed that Jose had fallen in love with Gwen, and that he believed that Gwen was biologically a female.
So I'm sitting there like, you need to calm down. And I said, we should let this person go. So I looked in the bathroom and I said, Lita, I think you should go now. And she jumped off the counter and she walked out the house. And then I'm looking at Jose and I looked over and here's Lita walking right back in the house. I'm all, what the hell? And then here comes the boys, Jason, Jaron, and Mike. They were right behind her.
She tried to get to a phone to call me, and it was taken from her each time. And then she tried to escape from that house several times, and each time was pulled back in.
Jose's younger brother, Manny, testified that he also tried to get Gwen out of the house, but Jaron and Michael stopped him. Jurors not only heard about Gwen's near escapes, they heard how she literally tried to stop the blows during one of the attacks with her words. Witnesses testified that she pleaded for her life, saying, "Please don't, I have a family." There was more violence when the men took Gwen into the living room.
Jose went into the kitchen, got a frying pan, and strike Gwen in the head, and then run back and grab the next thing he could lay his hands on, a can of food, struck Gwen in the head with it.
Right before this happened, Nicole says she went to get her boyfriend, Paul, who left the kitchen when the conversation first got confrontational.
I came back out and this was at the time where I seen Lita not in sight at all. Mike had blood all over his hands. I said, this is way too much for me, this is way too much for me. I said, I gotta go, I don't know what you guys are doing, but I gotta go. And that's when Paul had walked out and we went to leave. The last time I seen her was sitting on the couch and I walked out the house.
Gwen was bloody and on the couch. What's unclear is her level of consciousness. Prosecutors say this was a crucial moment, past the point of explosive outbursts and a pause long enough for the men to decide if Gwen would live or die.
There were some discussions about what to do, and a decision was made that they were going to kill Gwen. And she was taken out into the garage and had a rope wrapped around her neck, and she was strangled to death.
Mike said, I need a sharp knife or some rope. And I gave him my knife. And they used the rope and tied her up. And when the blanket was wrapped around her, I saw the feet tied. Okay? Around the ankles? Around the ankles. And then when we put it in the truck, I saw rope around the neck.
The viciousness of that strangulation in the garage, you think about the amount of time it takes for someone to die. You've wrapped something around their neck and you're twisting it tighter, tighter, and tighter. And they suffer, and they suffer, and they suffer, and then they die. That's about the most vicious, cold-blooded thing I can think of.
Trying to understand how people can go to such lengths to just disregard human life. That was hard.
The four men then drove Gwen's body to the Sierra, a 4-hour drive to El Dorado County, where they buried her.
They, of course, made their pact. Nobody says anything. We take this to our graves.
In the morning when I woke up to go to work the next day, her contact holder was in the vanity. So that right there triggered something horrible in my stomach and my mind.
My mom called me in a panic. She's like, I have a horrible feeling. I said, okay, Mom, like, call the cops. I started to panic. So I started calling hospitals and morgues. Sunday is when they reported her as a missing person.
So I knew in my heart and soul that my daughter was gone.
A week goes by, Gwen is missing. No one has come forward with any information. It appears basically police have nothing to go on. But then they got the break they needed.
Gwen's body never, ever would have been discovered but for one of the participants, Jaron Neighbors, telling a friend of his.
Rumors were circulating about a murder, and the chatter linked back to Jaron. Police got Jaron's friend to wear a wire and record Jaron talking about the murder.
They arrested Jaron. He admitted his involvement and talked about what happened that night, and ultimately the dominoes fell.
After Jaron confessed, he took investigators to the gravesite, where officers found Gwen's body.
The police officer drove up to my house. I could see through the blinds, and I knew instantly they were coming to tell me they found her body.
I fell to my knees and I just cried because I already knew, and they said that they found her body. And all I could think of was I needed to get to my mom.
From Jaron, police learned who else was there the night Gwen was killed and started bringing them in for questioning.
We tied the rope around their neck. Was it you? Mike? I know you didn't mean for anything to happen.
Police arrested Jaron Neighbors and his friends Jose Merrill and Michael Magidson.
Charged in the murder of a 17-year-old, the three defendants are being held without bail. They are also charged with committing a hate crime.
They're going to pay for what they did. And I hope that everybody out there who sees this learns something from this, because he was a beautiful person inside and out.
Gwen's murder captured the public's attention, and I remember emotions were amplified on both sides. It didn't take long for the story to make national headlines.
I think her being 17 and a minor was impactful. She was clearly really beautiful. You couldn't not kind of stare back into those eyes and wonder who she was and who she would have been if she were still alive. The community was rallied around a very obvious injustice. There were people who wanted to do something. They were outraged, they were upset, they were grieving for both Gwen and what this meant for trans people and LGBT people generally.
The truth of the matter is we live in a very homophobic society. This society is one that will not accept you at face value, will not accept you for who you are.
Everybody's focusing on his lifestyle, and the real issue is he was murdered. I loved him unconditionally the way he was. He was beautiful as a male or a female.
How to refer to Gwen was confusing from the beginning. Keep in mind, this was a time when police and Gwen's own family referred to her as Eddie and he. Trans activists were adamant that we use Gwen and she. The process was a learning experience for the public as well as Gwen's family.
I take responsibility for the confusion that I caused by referring to her as Eddie Gwen. I was just wanting to make sure that neither one was forgotten. Not Eddie, not Gwen. It took a while. I had to teach myself to say she and to be more consistent with Gwen, and I didn't like sitting in the courtroom hearing him and he and Eddie, and it just rubbed me the wrong way because we weren't talking about Eddie at that time. We were talking about Gwen. They killed Gwen. They didn't kill Eddie, they killed Gwen.
20 years ago, the term transgender wasn't widely used outside the LGBTQ community. There were some that questioned, was Gwen being deceitful, presenting as a woman? And others who firmly answered, she was just being who she was. A larger conversation started to take place about the use of pronouns and how people identify. That dialogue was an awakening for many.
It's hard to talk about Laramie now, to tell you what it is. And the students really need to talk.
The murder happened as Newark Memorial High School was preparing to stage the Laramie Project. It's a play about the 1998 murder of Matthew Shepard, an openly gay college student in Wyoming. And people started drawing parallels between what happened in Laramie, Wyoming, and Newark, California.
We're feeling what they felt, and we're going through the same things as them.
I'm having to deal with this terrible murder of Eddie, and to to try to come to terms with that it really did happen here in my community is very difficult for me.
As the murder and the play got more coverage, a Kansas fundamentalist preacher announced that he planned to picket not just the play, but Gwen's funeral. Reverend Phelps and his followers used predictable tactics, hate speech towards gay and transgender individuals.
Dying time is truth time, and funeral time is the time to preach some gospel.
Eddie lived the life of an unrepentant, homosexual sinner.
There's a lot of hurtful things that are being said about him, and that he's gonna burn in hell, and that, you know, they're gonna protest the funeral. That really hurts me, you know what? His life was hard enough already.
Amid the turmoil, famed women's rights attorney Gloria Allred came to represent the family.
There could be no justification, no excuse for this kind of violence against this child.
In the end, Reverend Phelps did not show up to the funeral, but anti-gay and anti-trans demonstrators did.
If you live that way, you live that life, you die unrepentant, you go to hell.
That crazy Reverend Phelps that had come to protest the Laramie Project play at the high school, well, he ended up at my doorstep the day before the funeral. The flowers that came from his Westboro church in Kansas. So there was a bomb threat, so they took that arrangement out to the back of the parking lot.
The funeral proceeded as planned. If anything, that uninvited sideshow seemed to strengthen the solidarity of hundreds of supporters.
Let's release the butterflies.
I released 17 monarch butterflies the day of her funeral, one for each year of her life.
3 weeks after the funeral, police arrested a fourth suspect for Gwen's murder, Jason Cazares.
Look me right in the eye. Look me in the eye. So you all look me in the eye. Seriously. No, not seriously. I know that you were there when you heard that, when they started questioning him about his sexuality and what sex he was.
Can't say nothing. You know what? I don't know.
Fast forward a year and a half later, the trial finally gets underway.
Lita was someone with whom they could get drunk and get high and enjoy, at least some of them, random sexual encounters.
This was a great tragedy. This was an explosion of emotion that still resonates now in this court.
It's hard to know whether this woman, Nicole Brown, hurt or helped the prosecution's case.
She has problems remembering how long things took, what the sequence were of events. She has memory gaps.
Prosecutors tried desperately today to bolster Nicole Brown's credibility, asking the judge to allow hours of videotaped conversations Brown had with police investigators. The judge ruled not to allow that evidence, disappointing Araujo's family.
Even though 3 of the 4 suspects were keeping quiet, the people's case had Jaron Neighbors, his confession, and his highly anticipated questioning under oath.
The prosecution's key witness is expected in court tomorrow. Jaron Neighbors agreed to an 11-year manslaughter sentence in exchange for testifying against the other 3 men.
He was the linchpin. He was a co-participant, but he was the only person that could give us everything from start to finish.
Neighbors' testimony about how Araujo died will be incredibly painful for the family, but they say necessary for justice.
We want everything to be told because Gwen's not here anymore and we don't know what happened.
The trial was agonizing for the family. They were hearing many of these details for the very first time. Prosecutors laid out not only the progression of Gwen's killing, but also, they said, her sexual identity provoked the attack. The testimony was unfiltered and graphic. At one point, Gwen's mother couldn't listen anymore, and I remember she just got up and left the courtroom.
I was there for her, not for me, because if it was up to me, I wouldn't have been there. I mean, it's the most uncomfortable feeling, and I remember in the beginning, everyone looked at me like I'd ruined their lives. The other parents were looking at me like I'd done something wrong. The difference is, they can still see their children. And I can't. And I never will. Ever. And she didn't deserve that.
During the trial, defense attorneys seized on Jose's reaction when he learned that Gwen had male genitalia and started questioning if he was gay. They used that to explain why the men responded with violence.
He was scared because, am I gay? Am I humiliated? Was I tripping?
Defense lawyer John Noonan echoed the arguments of fellow defense lawyers that the crime in question was the result of an emotional shock and doesn't meet the definition of first-degree murder.
There was a heat of passion that he was responding to, provoked by the discovery of a sexual deception that set off an array of emotion that propelled him into an act, a horrible act, but one that the law defines as manslaughter, not as murder.
They claimed the gay panic defense, that they panicked when they discovered that she was anatomically still a male, and Nicole Brown came out running, "It's an effing man, it's an effing man," and that's when everything started. So you blame my daughter because she's born this way?
Michael's defense was essentially, my client was forced to engage in what was not a true consensual sexual act, and that once he learned that, he snapped, and he had that state of mind that exists when you have a provocation such that the ordinarily reasonable person of average disposition might tend to act rashly and violently.
While defense attorneys maintained that their clients had been tricked, Gwen's mom and sister had explained that at this point, Gwen had been identifying and living as a woman for 3 years.
Gwen didn't owe anyone any explanations of who she was and did not deserve to be put in that level of danger because she didn't reveal to somebody that she was trans.
When you have the California criminal justice system allowing murderers of LGBTQ people to come into court and say, sorry, I'm just really homophobic or I'm really transphobic and I freaked out, that completely devalues our lives.
These right here are my notebooks from the trial. I actually keep my reporter notebooks next to my computer to this day. I still look up at them on a regular basis and I think about the experiences of being at that trial. It was so intense and painful. You don't sit in a courtroom every day and hear about someone who is not dissimilar from you and what they endured because people hated who she was, and know that that's kind of how you are too.
In the end, the jury couldn't reach a verdict, and the case ended in a mistrial.
3 defendants, 9 days of jury deliberations, and 1 outcome, reducing the victim's mother to tears.
I will now declare a mistrial and discharge the jury for further service in this case.
I was shocked. I didn't think it would end in a mistrial. It was hard enough going through the preliminary, then from the preliminary to the trial. That was hard enough. And then you're going to tell me that I have to go through another trial? I didn't even know how I could do it.
The defense position outraged gay, lesbian, and transgender activists on a national level. Now they're appalled the jury did not convict the defendants of murder and hate crime charges.
We need a better jury and we need justice for Gwen.
It's our job to make our voices heard in a way.
Within hours, LGBTQ activists held a demonstration in San Francisco demanding a new trial.
This is like open season on us. And justice delayed is justice denied.
The day it ended in a mistrial, the very next day, was court in Fremont for her name change.
10 days later, Eddie's name was officially changed to Gwen. It was the first time in California that a court granted a name change after death to a transgender person. The mistrial happened on the week leading up to the Pride Parade in San Francisco. The transgender community was already talking about having an event specifically for trans people. At the time, none existed. So 3 days after the mistrial, they held the first trans march in San Francisco. Remembering Gwen was an important part of that gathering. Sylvia Guerrero spoke to the crowd.
I'll never forget her getting up and speaking at the first trans march in Dolores Park.
I only wish I could have been there that night.
There was a lot of outrage, and she was a spectacular, raw, personal, real voice.
But I want people to learn from this.
At the time, I was the philanthropic director at Horizons Foundation. Through my relationship with Sylvia Guerrero, I realized that there might be a really important way to turn this tragedy into education.
How hard must it have been for my baby to wake up every day and to be who she was?
The Horizons Foundation did a fund, the Gwen Araujo Education Fund. And through that fund, I think I did 70 schools. I just talked about experiences with my daughter, and I shared with them the things that she went through at school, which were important, the bullying, and how it made her feel and how it made us feel. It personalized it.
I think it was really a message of tolerance, a message of love and acceptance, and of seeing difference as something beautiful rather than scary.
A second trial began nearly a year later.
It was just like, here we go again, and, you know, pull out your box of tricks, all you defense lawyers. I was there Monday through Thursday, and then I wouldn't sleep Monday through Thursday. That was my life. Was no life. Still don't have a life. I might as well still be stuck in that courtroom because those images never go away.
There was a significant difference in the second trial. Because of the legal name change, the lawyers and the media referred to the victim as Gwen, not Eddie. The prosecutor also worried the first jury may have got caught up in the first-degree murder charge, resulting in a hung jury. So this time, he gave the jury an out.
During the closing argument, I told the jury, look, if you find yourself in a position where you can't decide whether this is first or second degree murder, but you believe that it's murder, don't hang between first and second. Just come back with a second degree murder conviction.
We, the jury, in the above entitled cause, find the defendant, Jose A. Merrill, guilty.
The jury found both Jose Merrill and Michael Magidson guilty of second-degree murder. The jury deadlocked on Jason Cazares. His attorney later negotiated a manslaughter charge to avoid yet a third trial. None of the men were convicted of a hate crime. Gwen's family talked about their pain at the sentencing.
My sons have been most impacted by this. It hurts me that their mommy hasn't been there for them as much as I should have. But if I haven't been sick or depressed or busy with the trial, I've been too tired to be much fun.
There are days we can't sleep or get out of bed because we were crying all night, remembering her last moments and words. Please don't, I have a family.
As Jose listened to Gwen's family, he cried. And when he got his chance to speak, he showed remorse.
From the bottom of my heart, I'm sincerely and truly sorry. I wish I could go back to that horrible day and erase it.
The apology was in sharp contrast to what Michael had to say about the verdict.
This case was based entirely on lies. Lies by the witnesses, lies by my co-defendants, and worst of all, these lies were encouraged by the prosecutor. I received nothing remotely close to a fair and unbiased trial.
The sentence for Michael Magidson and Jose Merrill were 15 years to life. Jason Cazares received 6 years in prison. Jaron Neighbors got 11 years. Gwen's murder had a lasting impact in so many ways. Personally, of course, for everyone involved in the case, but also for future legal cases. A year after the second trial, California passed a law that instructed jurors they can't make decisions based on a victim's gender or sexual orientation. In 2014, that law was strengthened to outright ban defenses that use a panic defense to justify murder.
California was the first state to pass legislation that would not allow a panic defense for murders of transgender people. The fact that you could use a defense to say, I was in a panic, I was surprised, and therefore it shouldn't be treated as a murder, just as manslaughter. I think it was definitely sending a message that the life of a transgender person wasn't as valuable as the life of someone else. And that's why we needed to correct it.
This is a cold-blooded, brutal, vicious murder. And the idea that there was even the slightest validity to a manslaughter defense based on provocation, to me, was always an absurdity.
Only when it is called what it truly is, which was a murder, are you going to be able to have justice. If a defense attorney is able to lower the charge, then we are making transgender people more vulnerable.
The case of Gwen Araujo was a moment of change, a moment where her murderers didn't necessarily get off the hook, and it was a time when the media and the public learned about trans lives and a trans death in ways that hadn't been approached before.
I'm doing a lifetime sentence to this day. Took away my career. It changed my family life with my children. Can't find a job. Just struggling to survive. I don't have my own home, and I've been here and there staying with people short term. I mean, I have stayed in my truck a lot of times. The nightmares, the visions of her body post-autopsy, pre-autopsy, is those images that never leave my mind.
She definitely is just stuck in the same place, and she's never able to get herself back. And sometimes it feels like I know it feels like we lost her mom. It's not fair to her because she lives in this prison in her own mind. It's not fair to me and my siblings or her grandkids just to get what's left of her. Like, my mom worked, she was a single mom, she made good money, and she just lost herself, so it's kind of sad. It feels like she died.
After Gwen's death, I went deep into the closet. I joined the military. I wanted to be the man that my dad wanted me to be, you know? And when the emotional, the mental pain, the gender dysphoria, the falseness, the false me, I just couldn't take it anymore. And I had to come out. The fear of losing friends was great. The fear of losing family was huge. To me, this is a place where I connect with nature, with energy. When I'm here, it kind of feels like a mother's love. And this is where I find Gwen. I never felt like Gwen left me. Physically, yeah, but I never felt that her spirit left me. And this is somewhere where I come to talk to her. I came out as trans in June 2016 and started up on hormones. It's not easy. not being who you are, especially being queer and holding that in is a very difficult thing. Gwen's family being so accepting from the start was, I wish all parents could be that way. You know, my parents were accepting, they're still struggling with it, but I wish all parents could be, all family could be as accepting as Gwen's family. We need that.
There's still people that are being murdered for being who they are, and in brutal manner. They're tortured, and they go through a lot of pain in their death, and it's just really sad because they go through a lot of pain in their life.
A death investigation from earlier this week was a horrific murder. The transgender woman's body was found in the Schuylkill River, badly mutilated.
33-year-old Vicky Ramos Gutierrez died in a fire Wednesday morning around 3 a.m. Investigators say he admitted stabbing Gutierrez and then setting the apartment on fire.
For somebody to stab you and do the things that happened to her, you know it's fueled by hate.
How many of us need to be murdered? How many of us need to hang ourselves, slit our wrists? Because we don't have the community, we don't feel like we belong, we don't think we exist.
I'm Gwendolyn Smith. I've been a transgender activist for about 30 years. Founded the Remembering Our Dead website, which later became part of the International Transgender Day of Remembrance. I started chronicling anti-transgender violence, primarily because nobody else seemed to be doing it. We were failing to note our deaths, and we were seeing these cases just endlessly repeat.
Trans women, and particularly trans women of color, are being brutally murdered throughout this country and throughout the world. Few people know their names, and their communities suffer in silence. And that's why we have the Trans Day of Remembrance every year, so we can at least say their names, at least give them that honor and respect.
We are murdered the way we are murdered because of the messages and the bias that people create against us and towards us.
Republican political leaders who try to pass these laws that trans kids can't play sports, trans people can't use the bathroom that corresponds to their gender identity. It's this notion that trans people are somehow faking it.
Governor Abbott directed the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services to investigate gender-affirming procedures for those under the age of 18.
As our current child abuse laws stand, giving children hormones or pubertal blockers can constitute child abuse.
So this is trying to sow doubt about kids, about their gender identity. It's trying to say that, they could be whatever they want to be.
You're seeing hundreds of laws that have been written in the last couple of years to try to legislate trans people, to prevent them from getting an equal footing in schools, to prevent them from using basic facilities, to criminalize our healthcare and our healthcare providers. These are hard times to be a trans person.
They're not choosing to be trans female, they're not choosing to be a trans, they're just not choosing it. Who would choose this life? Given the option, who would choose the harassment? Who would choose to be pushed away, thrown out of your family? Who would choose to, be laughed at in public? Who would choose to be beaten in public? Given the option, we don't choose that. We don't choose to be trans, we are.
So they want to put the parents in prison and put the kids in foster care. And imagine the signal that sends to trans children. Basically that because of who you are, you're going into foster care and your parents are going to prison. And is it any wonder these kids are committing suicide at a higher rate?
It's hard to hear that there are schools that don't allow people to use the word gay, because there was a really long time when I didn't know what it meant to be transgender. There was a really long time when I didn't know what non-binary was, because I didn't have the vocabulary and I didn't have support or people to to talk to about it. And it's huge to have people to talk about it, and to hear that, and then be able to put yourself in a place like, I'm not crazy. There's room for all of us, like we all belong. Like we exist. There's a place in this world for us too.
The murder of Gwen Araujo was one of those things that sort of like ignites in me to like not really think about what others thought of me or of our community, but rather what is the direction that we need to go as a community.
If Gwen was 17 today, she might be non-binary. They could be non-binary. Today, there's a lot more room for people to feel both masculine and feminine. They can feel neither. They can feel both at the same time.
A lot of people don't know that the white stripe in the trans flag is where a trans non-binary individual would fit in. There's the pink, there's the blue, and then there's the rest of us.
I am so impressed with the next generation around their instinctive understanding that there are so many genders that one can both be as well as be attracted to.
Happy 37th birthday, Gwen. Thank you for always watching over us. We love you and we miss you too much. Love, Mom. Fly free, my beautiful butterfly angel. Happy 37th birthday, Gwen. Kiss him and say, I love you, Gwen. 1, 2, 3. Besitos. Love you, Mama. Happy birthday. I only wish that she had gotten to grow up and to fall in love and to live an adult life and to be happy, most importantly. Before she was killed, she loved butterflies. And at the funeral home, the first thing I saw was this emblem with 2 angels playing with 2 butterflies. As I was driving over here, a beautiful monarch butterfly flew in front of my windshield. So that's how she does, Mom, I'm here. I know, mija. You're always here. And I'm always here for you.